everyone has the right to be happy. Regardless of gender, age, skin color, or religion, all people have the right to be happy and wish to be happy. However, as we go through life, this is often not the case. Even though we want to be happy, reality is not always happy, and although we say we have the right to happiness, we often cannot exercise that right properly. Why is that? There are hundreds, thousands, or even more reasons why we are not happy. You're driving to work in the morning and someone cuts you off. You feel annoyed. On the subway, someone bumps into you and doesn't apologize. You feel angry. You arrive at work and your boss scolds you. Again, you feel upset. At lunch, a coworker gossips about you. You feel anger again. The price of a stock you bought goes up. You feel happy. You had a fight with your girlfriend but made up. You feel happy again. Your favorite baseball team wins. You feel happy. But does the world always go the way we want? No, it doesn't. If happiness only comes when things go the way we want, then we're bound to suffer when they don't. Sometimes things go our way, and other times they don't. That's why life keeps repeating joy and suffering, happiness and sorrow. This cycle where joy turns into suffering and suffering into joy is what we call samsara. There are two meanings to samsara. The first is that based on the karma from a past life, we are born into our current life in a certain form, and based on the karma of this life, we will be reborn in a certain form in the next life. The second is the repetition of joy and suffering within this very lifetime. Like a squirrel spinning on a wheel, everyone thinks, if what I want happens, I'm happy. If it doesn't, I'm miserable. Because of this mindset, humans are bound to endlessly repeat cycles of happiness and suffering, samsara. The happiness we pursue is not lasting happiness. Even if I'm happy now, that happiness soon becomes the seed for future suffering. Likewise, even if I'm suffering now, that can eventually turn into happiness. If we look at our lives from a longer perspective, we realize this truth. What we thought was good may not have been truly good, and what seemed bad may not have been entirely bad. The happiness that the Buddha taught is not this kind of cyclical, alternating happiness, the happiness that arises and vanishes within samsara. Then what kind of happiness did the Buddha pursue? It is sustainable happiness, a happiness that does not turn into suffering, a state beyond samsara. But is it truly possible to get rid of suffering while keeping only pleasure? Perhaps that's possible in some imagined paradise or pure land that no one has ever experienced. But in this real world, joy and suffering always follow each other. They cannot be separated. The root of both joy and suffering is desire, the craving for something. If we get what we want, we feel joy. If we don't, we feel suffering. But in Buddhism, nirvana is not a state of lasting pleasure. It is a state in which suffering does not arise. So how can we reach this state free from suffering? To get there, we must become free from the root of both joy and suffering, our cravings and desires. When we are no longer bound by our desires, suffering disappears and even pleasure disappears. In order to reach such a state, since the root of pleasure and suffering lies in desires and cravings, if we become free from even desires themselves, then suffering disappears and pleasure also vanishes. That is why ordinary people may not like the kind of happiness Buddhism talks about, because it does not pursue the kind of pleasure that releases dopamine. When one pursues the happiness of Buddhism, suffering disappears, but so does the pleasure that ordinary people have been seeking. To follow one's desires to the extreme is called hedonism. But the law of desire is that it never knows satisfaction. Once one desire is fulfilled, another arises. Once that is fulfilled, yet another comes up. So when a desire is fulfilled, one feels joy, but when the next desire is not fulfilled, one feels suffering again. This repetition is exactly what constitutes samsara, the endless cycle of rebirth. That is why the Buddha practiced extreme asceticism to suppress desires. This is called asceticism or austerity-based path. In the Buddha's time, the mainstream worldview was hedonism, and the opposing school of thought was asceticism. As a prince, the Buddha naturally experienced hedonism, but he realized that even the pleasures he had enjoyed were part of samsara, a cycle where joy becomes suffering. So he followed the path of asceticism, undergoing 6 years of extreme austerity. He practiced severe fasting, held his breath to the limit, and endured extreme heat and cold. But instead of attaining enlightenment, he only brought confusion to his body and mind. This led the Buddha to reflect, why does such intense asceticism not bring liberation? It was through this reflection that he discovered the third path, neither indulgence nor mortification, the middle way. He recalled a childhood experience when he had naturally entered meditative concentration under a tree. Through focused practice and mindfulness, he completed the path to enlightenment. When a desire arises, we usually respond in two ways. We either act on the desire or we suppress it. But what if we don't respond at all? Then we become free from the desire. What is the method? What the Buddha discovered is more complex. But simply put, it is mindfulness sati. When a desire arises, we just notice, oh, a desire is arising. When we notice it, we don't get dragged by it, nor do we suppress it. If we follow the desire, we will surely face the consequences. If we suppress the desire, we create internal stress. For example, suppose someone makes me angry, and I often express that anger. The result is that people start avoiding me, and my reputation suffers. If instead I suppress that anger, I get stressed. I may manage to hold it back once or twice, but if I continue, it could make me sick. Eventually, I explode with words and actions and then regret it. This leads to a vicious cycle. I won't do that again, but I do it again. What if, instead, I simply practiced mindful awareness? When anger or desire arises, I just notice, anger is arising, or a craving is arising. Then I don't get carried away by it. Because I see it clearly, I don't suppress it either. Let's say someone who smokes or drinks is faced with a craving. In real life, they are faced with two choices: give in and smoke, or resist and endure. But mindfulness offers a third option, neither giving in nor suppressing. This is the middle way, and it requires steady practice. After attaining enlightenment, the first teaching the Buddha gave was, a practitioner should follow neither the path of indulgence nor the path of self-torment. Reject both extremes and follow the middle way. This, we can say, is the path to sustainable happiness, a state free from suffering. After attaining enlightenment, the first teaching the Buddha gave was that a practitioner should follow neither the path of sensual pleasure nor the path of extreme asceticism. This is what it means to abandon both extremes and walk the middle way. This can be called sustainable happiness, a state free from suffering. When we feel good, our minds become excited or agitated. When we become angry, our minds also become agitated. The fact that pleasure and suffering keep repeating means that our minds keep falling into this stirred-up state over and over again. On the other hand, mindfulness is a calm state of mind. You don't become overly excited when something feels good, and you don't become stirred up in anger when something feels bad. Most people have never experienced such a calm state. What they have experienced is only the excited state that comes when pleasure or pain arises. In other words, if we hold on to such a view of happiness, we can never be permanently happy. We must continue living a life in which pleasure and suffering are endlessly repeated. To escape from this cycle, a shift in values is necessary. That shift in values is what we call renunciation. In the life you are living now, you are probably wishing that pleasure would continue forever. But when that happens, suffering follows. So when suffering arises, you run away from home, so to speak. Then you return home again when you feel a bit of pleasure. And when suffering starts again, you run away once more, to completely burn away this cycle of alternating pleasure and suffering. That is what it means to leave the house, to renounce the world. If you think that you are suffering because of something, then sustainable happiness will be impossible. If instead of holding resentment or blame toward the conditions you're given, you accept those conditions positively, then you can be much more free from both pleasure and suffering. Going towards such a state is what we call Buddhist practice. Becoming a Buddhist practitioner does not necessarily mean shaving your head, leaving home, or living in a temple. When you free yourself from your old set of values and walk the path of liberation, that is the renunciation. However, in this world, as we live, we constantly compare ourselves with others, and this makes it difficult to escape from samsara. So, for beginners, it is often necessary to be temporarily secluded from the world. For the sake of practice, once you've had enough training to gain freedom, you can go out into the world and do any kind of work without issue, and enjoy sustainable happiness. No matter the situation, you will be able to maintain awareness of your own mind. You all have the right to be happy. Please claim that right. Subscribe and begin your path of mindful understanding.